Hello there, everybody, and welcome to Things We Said Today, our weekly podcast slash internet radio look at all things Beatles, both their history and what's happening today. I'm Al Sussman from Beatle Fan Magazine, and we have another special guest today. And before I introduce this special guest, I'll introduce my three co-hosts. First of all, the host of the syndicated Beatles radio show, Every Little Thing, Ken Michaels.
Hi, Al. Hi, everyone. Thanks for listening.
And the proprietor of the Beatles Examiner column and various other Examiner columns at Examiner.com. That's Steve Marinucci.
Hi, Al. Hello, everyone.
And last but certainly not least, another member of the Beatle fan family for many, many years, and also a noted classical music reviewer and musicologist, Allan Kozin.
Hey, Al, and hello, everyone.
And we have a very special guest, someone who Allan and I particularly know very well because she's been part of the Beatle fan family for just about 20 years, if I'm not mistaken. She was she broke down several barriers at Beatle fan back in the 80s or 90s actually, as pretty much the first woman to have a steady gig at Beatle fan. She also began doing a column about that new frontier back then called the internet. And she has continued to write for Beatle fan and for various other websites and various other elements. And a lot of that has gone into, she has actually two books coming out this year. And her book, Michael Jackson FAQ, will be out in, I think, before the end of the year. And just recently published is the book I have in my hands called Songs We Were Singing, subtitled Guided Tours Through the Beatles' Lesser Known Tracks, which is interesting. And our guest is, as I said, is Beatle Fan's longtime internet editor, Kit O'Toole.
Hi, everybody. I'm just honored to be here, and thank you so much for inviting me.
Well, it's our pleasure. Mm-hmm. Our pleasure. Let me ask you first about this subtitle, Guided Tours Through the Beatles' Lesser Known Tracks. Now, we're talking about, as I call it, the Rolls Royce of pop music catalogs. How are there lesser known Beatles tracks?
Well, I should preface this by saying that a lot of the book is a compilation of a series of articles I've done as part of a column called Deep Beatles,
right,
for Something Else Reviews. And I started doing this column for them in 2012. And they wanted me, to write a column on, pretty much any facet of the Beatles I wanted. And you didn't have to ask me twice. I said, of course, love to do it.
Sure.
And I decided because the readership of Something Else Reviews is so varied, it really is. You get a bit of everything. And including you get the hardcore fans, and then you get the more, casual fans. And so I thought it'd be interesting to do the lesser known tracks, meaning the B-sides, the album tracks. Of course, I get into the Decca sessions, the Star Club, I get into some of that as well. But it's material that you generally, or at least, maybe, I think these are songs that we hardcore fans sometimes take for granted, and songs that casual fans don't even know about. I mean, it's really interesting. Or I've had other people write comments on my pieces saying, "God, I totally forgot about that song," or "I haven't heard that song, and it's just not one I play a lot." And I see now, why it's something that should be important. So that's the thing. I haven't gotten into bootlegs yet, which I plan to in the future. But the lesser known are, as I said, these are these songs that you never hear played on the radio, and or they've even been sort of overlooked in other books. Just read a couple of sentences and then they move on to the quotes more important songs. And so this is my Deep Beatles, and this book is my attempt to say, let's bring these songs back to, let's look at them more closely and not just dismiss them as quotes filler tracks.
Hmm.
But of course,
Mm.
Beatles filler tracks are better than, most people's, great, so-called great songs. So it's hard to say filler, but in some ways, some of these songs were recorded as just fillers at the time, and of course, looking back at them now, they were anything but. So yeah, that's what I meant by lesser known.
Hmm. Now, just in kind of leafing through the book, I come across. I want to tell you.
Hmm.
Tell me what is unique, in your opinion, about that particular track.
Well, one thing that I just think is marvelous about is that chord, that piano chord, that galloping,
Hmm.
discordant chord. Who was doing that in a pop song, at that time? I mean, that was such an unusual touch, and I think that is something that's so indicative of what the Beatles were doing. And of course, as they went on, they got even more experimental. But that is a great example of an earlier case of them, you know, putting something in there that just grabbed the ear and just was such a kind of an odd, eccentric kind of thing to put in a pop song. And yet, of course, it works, and that's what makes it one of the things that makes it such a distinctive song. And so that is a classic example of a deep track for me. That it's something that can be too easily overlooked. And we've probably heard it so many times. And us hardcore fans, that we kind of forget how revolutionary something like that was in pop and rock at that time. So that is a perfect example of what I'm talking about when I talk about lesser known tracks that need to be, brought to the forefront.
Now, I should emphasize that the book is not completely about Beatles songs, and Ken will be happy to know that there's a fair amount of material in there about the solo years.
Yeah,
And
I started writing about that as well when I was with another site. I was music editor of a previous site. Well, I'm still there, Blog Critics, and I
Mhm.
wrote about some material there, which I'm sure we'll get into. But yep, I talk a bit about certain albums and songs from the solo years that again I think have been underrated and deserve more attention.
Mhm.
Mm.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like for instance, you do a particular chapter on Press to Play,
Yep.
which
Yep.
is not one of those McCartney albums that gets a whole lot of praise.
No, I mean, I think it was, and I will say, and I can say this, I'm an '80s kid, and I grew up on '80s music, and yes, it is an album from that time, a bit overproduced, lots of synthesizers. I agree with that. However, there are some fantastic tracks in there, and I also give Paul credit for being experimental on that album. I mean, Pretty Little Head is one of the weirdest things he ever did. And
That's right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's absolutely bizarre. But, I just always thought he deserved more credit for trying things like that. For trying. I mean, that was that album was quite a departure from what he was doing. Well, I mean, before that it was Broad Street, and he obviously decided to go in a very different direction
Mm-hmm.
with Press to Play. But I think, and he got really slammed for that at the time, critically slammed. I remember reading all the articles, just absolutely just slamming that album. And looking back, I don't think it really deserved that much to be attacked that harshly.
And on that note, I'm going to swing over to Ken because I'm sure he's got lots of questions.
Well, I'm sending you a virtual hug right now, Kit, for your comments there. Because to me, Press to Play is one of the most underrated of all of Paul's albums. And I think that Paul should be applauded for trying to experiment, like you said, and work with some of the contemporary producers of that time. And I know that, most Beatle fans are very divided on that album. They either love it or they hate it.
Yeah.
I don't know too many people are in the middle. But it just seems like there are so many people that would like Paul to have that pure McCartney sound that he had in the 70s or in the Beatle years. And when he tries to sound contemporary or try to fit whatever the sound is of the moment, he gets criticized for that. So there are a lot of fans that don't want to adapt to the change that's going on in music. And Paul tries to dabble every now and then with whatever new producers are doing well in the moment. Just take a look at the new album.
Right.
And, the producers that he's worked with there. So, he's listening to some of today's new music and he's trying to adapt to it. And I think a lot of fans who are kind of stuck in the classic McCartney mode of the Beatles and Wings don't want a departure from that. So whenever he does try to experiment to some people too much, then he gets slammed for it. So, and I know a lot of Beatle fans who love the 60s sound and the 70s sound. And then once the 80s came in and you had the synthesizers and the heavy drum sound,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of fans really resisted that. So, just like some fans resisted disco, so as music was changing, and Paul tried to go along with it somewhat, he never got completely absorbed in it.
No.
He dabbled a bit. Like Press to Play doesn't have too much, to me, production in that direction. Yes, Pretty Little Head, Talk More Talk, the song Press,
Mm-hmm.
definitely. But there's a lot of, classic McCartney sounds on there, from Footprints to Only Love Remains, Move Over Busker. However, Absurd is very Beatlesque.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Absolutely.
But anyway,
Well, I was just going to say, when you said Only Love Remains, and Al and I have talked about this in the past, that is, I think, one of the great lost McCartney ballads. I mean, I thought that was a beautiful song. I mean, just, melodically, lyrically, and I think it was an adult contemporary hit at the time. But
it was.
yeah, but that was it. And I always thought it was just such a I'd love to hear him perform it now. I mean, I just think it's one of his lost, it should have been hits.
I totally agree with you.
Mm-hmm.
But I do want to go back to the Beatle years
Mm-hmm.
a bit because one of the things I love about the book is how you go pretty far back, going back to the Deck audition recordings and then into the BBC stuff and the Star Club recordings.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just talk a little bit about the Decca stuff because I love listening to those 15 songs because as I've said several times, it shows the Beatles, they're almost getting there.
Yep.
They're really near getting closer to the sound when they were really a great live band and more polished. How do you pick of those 15 songs? I love September in the Rain, for example. I thought that was a great version of it, as well as Take Good Care of My Baby. You point out the 3 Lennon-McCartney originals in there
Mm-hmm.
as being songs that you think deserve more respect or examination. Are you saying that because you can see progression in John and Paul as songwriters at the moment, and you're noticing that, and that part of their history is fascinating? Or are you saying it because you truly believe these are strong songs?
Well, I think that it's a bit more of the first. I love, and this is what I do throughout this book, that I love looking, really tracing the Beatles' development, their artistic development, and how, rapidly they developed. And as you said, this was the stage where they were just about there, not quite coming together. And these early compositions, like Dreamers Do, that had, like Dreamers Do, has some catchiness to it, and I don't know if I don't know if I'd go as far to say, oh, that would have been a hit on the level of Please Please Me. It's not quite that arresting to me, but as I said, their ability to write, I hate to use the cliche, but that's what it is, a hook, is starting to develop. And I think the Decca auditions are very important to look at from that level, both for the originals and for the covers, because too many people like to, I've talked to about it, even have said to me, why are you wasting your time talking about these? Those were terrible and everything went wrong. And well, it's part of their history. You can't overlook that. And for example, I think George was really sort of the unsung hero, not to use a pun, of the Decca sessions, because some of my favorite tracks that they did had him on lead. Three
Right.
Cool Cats, I think that's a terrific vocal.
Mm-hmm.
And even though it's corny, Chic of Araby, I thought his vocals were great on that. He got that, he has that sort of wink to his voice. And so I think, he was really, as I said, the unsung hero of those sessions just for his voice. So, they're really in that process, as you said, of development. And that's why it's worth it to revisit those sessions. And also, to see why Ringo was such an essential ingredient to the group as well.
Mm-hmm. Because you can hear something lacking with Pete Best on drums.
Exactly. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again. I'm sure everybody here has met Pete Best. Nice guy. I don't like to, dump on him or anything like that, but he just didn't have the versatility and imagination that Ringo has, and every song that you hear on that, he kind of approaches it in the same way, Pete does. And so you just see how Ringo was the last, piece of the puzzle that finally made them become the Beatles that we know. But as I said, those Decca auditions are very important to look at and to see, hey, they did have, Lennon and McCartney were developing their craft and there was promise there.
Right.
But it's amazing. Look at compare that with, as I said, their first album. Incredible how much they grew as songwriters. Amazing.
Yeah, and to think the Decca audition recordings and the Please Please Me album were about a year apart.
Exactly.
Really, 13 months.
Astounding.
Look how much they grew in that amount of time.
Absolutely. It's incredible.
And then another 10 months with the Beatles and the growth that they showed on that album.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, there was constant growth.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's one thing that I've found. Another thing writing this book, and it's something, again, I think we all sort of know it, but when you really listen closely to these songs, you just see this development, this artistic development from one album to the next, and you realize, those albums were like a year or less apart. It's astounding.
Yeah.
Right.
It really is.
Very true. Very true.
Really?
Who does that? Steve, I'm sure you've got some input.
Well, you were talking about bootlegs are something that I'm really into, and you were saying that you were going to get more into bootlegs. If you had to, and I noticed you did actually touch on a couple of bootleg tracks in the book.
Mm-hmm.
But if you had to pick one or two tracks out of all the many bootleg tracks, which ones would you consider as your favorites and ones that would be worth writing about too?
Oh my goodness. Well, I would say I love I love listening to how songs develop, you know,
Hmm.
how they grow. I mean, I love listening to like the early version of Tomorrow Never Knows. You know, I love
Yeah.
hearing that and I mean, it was just, and the early version, I mean, it really, it just show how they knew, or John knew early on the sort of sound he wanted. And obviously the end result was a bit different, but that sort of that, you know, hallucinogenic kind of quality was there from the beginning. And I love hearing that. I love hearing the development of Strawberry Fields. I mean, that is, you know, fascinating to hear how, I mean, it was such a multi-layered recording in many ways. I love that. I love too listening to alternate takes. Like I've always, and I'm sure there'll be listeners now who will say, "How dare she?" But I love listening to the version of "I Am the Walrus" without the chanting at the end,
Ah,
and the I love it just straight, you know. And I just thought, why didn't they release it like that? You know, I mean, the chanting's great, you know. I mean, I understand why they did it, but I love it the other way too before they added that in, you know. So it's tracks like that I'd love to talk about. And as I said, I plan to start going into that a bit more, but I wanted to sort of ease into that, you know, with readers. But those are a few that I would you know, love to go into eventually, because as I said, I love listening to how a song develops over time, and the, you know, really the craftsmanship that they had, and how carefully these songs were put together.
yeah.
Just you know, that's one thing I love exploring in this book and in my columns is just, you know, how they gradually constructed these songs. I mean,
Hmm.
it's a lot of work. In fact, Steve, I saw you mentioned a book, a new book that's out. I think you mentioned this on Facebook on John Lennon. It's, you know, yet another so-called
Oh,
biography.
that one, yeah. The
Yep.
one that the Daily Mail wrote up that would really trashed him pretty badly. It's not all on Lennon. It's on other stuff too. It's on
Yeah.
British culture in general, but I guess it has a chapter on Lennon that really goes after him pretty hard.
Yep. And one of the things that I remember you mentioning in this article was that he was accused of, quotes, never having a real job.
Hmm.
Which that just, I mean, that's just hilarious on many levels. But one of the things that made me think of was, as I said, these songs, I mean, they just, I mean, it just took so much work and so many takes and overdubs and all to create these songs. And I mean, it just took so much time. So I mean, not having a real job, what does that mean?
Right.
Yeah.
What rock and roller has a real job?
Exactly.
You know, that is their job.
Yeah, and exactly. And it's a hard job. I mean, I know the whole sex, drugs, and rock and roll kind of lifestyle, but yeah, you actually do have to do some work, and as I said, there's craftsmanship involved and persistence. So yeah, that was the last straw for me when I read your article, or you know, linked to it. I thought, that's it. That's not on my reading list.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Kit.
Oh, sure.
And I think I'm pretty sure. Well, actually, let me just mention before I pass this over to Alan, I
Hmm.
should mention that one of the chapters in the book, as I'm leafing through here, because you've got this broken down into several different kind of themed areas,
Hmm.
and one of the chapters is termed "What album is the biggest selling album of the decade?" Over to you, Alan.
Why me? Listen. Okay, it sold a lot of copies.
Uh-oh.
Many of those copies to me. Okay, but still, I was just saying they should have done something more interesting. Anyway, so anyway, yeah, I think I guess what struck me is the number of chapters where you go through the history of the song and how it was made and what's
Hmm.
going on in it, but in the end are fascinated particularly by what it shows about what they're eventually going to do. How you can see the seeds of something that they would do later, in things going as back as far as, I guess, things we said today, and maybe even earlier. Just sort of experiments that they would do. And I think you sort of alluded to that tonight too. So that obviously is a fascination for you, isn't it?
Absolutely. Well, like, a perfect example of that is the Word.
Mm.
That to me, that is such an important song, on many levels, and one of them is thematically. That's such an important song because it's a shift. Before then, I mean, that was, and I think Paul has mentioned this in different interviews, that they tended to do more, more straightforward love songs, and it was, love. It was, using the second person, and But here we have a case. Now we get to the Word, where, of course, they are discussing love, but it's a different kind. Now we're getting into something more philosophical, and deeper and more abstract. And, that's sort of it was a precursor in a way to what would, of course, become the Summer of Love, and themes that they would explore in a bit more in Revolver, certainly, and then, of course, Sergeant Pepper. I mean, it was Magical Mystery Tour. I mean, it was, the Word is just this preview, of what was to come, lyrically. And that was one of my favorite. That's actually one of my favorite chapters in the book. That I just thought, wow, here's a song that's a hidden gem in many ways. But one of the ways it's also a hidden gem is that this was an important song, in their development and in their songwriting and in their the themes that they would address. Now we're getting into, I call Beatles 2.0. Getting away from, and not to dismiss what they were doing before. I mean, I'm not saying what they were doing before was simplistic or anything, but it's just a shift. It's a shift in subject, and, as I said, getting more philosophical. I just thought that was a fascinating song to uncover and really say, this is a song that deserves multiple listenings.
Mm-hmm. One of the ones that I guess I enjoyed reading the most was your chapter on rain. And you find that one, as you get to the end of the chapter, a precursor to Tomorrow Never Knows. She said, I'm only sleeping, Lucy in the Sky. What is the earliest indication of some of their more musically experimental stuff, apart from the lyrics, that you can recall having gotten to in here? I think it might be things we said today, but
yeah, it's gosh, I mean, absolutely, things we said today would be an example. I also think, I mean, I could list a number of tracks, like thematically and all what they were doing, but even something like I Call Your Name. That's one of my other favorites from the book, because that was fascinating to research, because that was an early attempt of theirs to incorporate world music, into which was fascinating, because before, I mean, of course, I always knew when they all of a sudden shifted tempos, and what is that? And so it was fascinating to look at it. And, it was, of course, their attempt at what was called blue beat at the time, that would develop into reggae, and but I mean, I just wonder, how many songs were and artists were attempting to incorporate that kind of thing. So in a way, that was a pretty experimental track. In a way, yeah, and it was, and again, this is a song that you tend to kind of overlook as, it's a fun album track, and that's nice, but it turns out there was a lot more going on underneath.
So my copy didn't have the chapter on Revolution number 9. Where is that? But
that's volume 2, Allan.
Okay. And for the solo things, I guess Life with the Lions will definitely be included, right?
You bet. Absolutely. But no, but the thing is, we and yes, I mean that's not, let's just say that's not something I flip onto my iPod that much, but however, that was a way though that I think was one of John's many strengths, is that he would try to he really challenged the audience, and obviously Revolution 9 was the ultimate challenge.
Hmm.
But I mean, look at, I Want You, She's So Heavy,
Hmm.
ending it with that white noise. Who was
Right.
doing that?
No.
I mean, who else would try something like that? And that, of course, was coming directly from, what the art that he and Yoko were experimenting with at the time, and definitely her influence there. And but I mean, that was a great example, and perhaps a bit more, shall we say, accessible than Revolution 9.
Right.
But that was another way that he was incorporating the avant-garde, into the Beatles music. And by the way, I think this is another thing, that a strength of the Beatles in general. They didn't they didn't, they said our audience they're not stupid, we can challenge them in many ways. We don't have to just go, play what is trendy and what will sell. They can handle classical music. They can handle a bit more avant-garde. They can handle Eleanor Rigby, which is poetry. And I
Hmm.
mean, the audience isn't stupid. They can follow. And sure, they probably lost some fans,
Hmm.
along the way with, Strawberry Fields. I mean, I'm sure that freaked out some their early fans at the time. But I think mostly they said, the audience, the pop music audience, is more intelligent and than they're given credit for.
Hmm.
And, if we try these different things, we think they will follow. They will be up to the challenge. And I think that's one of the things that really shows in their music, and some of the songs that I discuss,
Hmm.
is, and they were one of the first bands, I think, to ever say that we're not going to follow the crowd. We're not going to, that's why they didn't do How Do You Do It, which was a perfectly good song, when
Right.
George Martin wanted them to record. Great pop song, but it wasn't forward thinking exactly.
Yeah,
Shall
they
we
were
say?
very, very averse to doing the same thing again.
Hmm.
Although, you mentioned "I Want You, She's So Heavy" and the white noise, but in addition, the repetitiveness is sort of what was beginning to happen at the same time in classical music was minimalism, and
Mm,
that was involving sort of repeating things, and sort of like "I Want You, She's So Heavy's" ending. But to give Paul some credit, where he always says, I was the avant-gardist, not John. He did that in Hey Jude the year before.
absolutely.
So,
Yeah.
and it would be odd that maybe it's the white noise that makes the difference, but everybody seemed to accept it in Hey Jude a bit more than they did in "I Want You, She's So Heavy." You know,
Interesting. I never thought of that.
Hmm.
And of course, Hey Jude was also challenging the convention of what was the typical
length,
single length, like 3 minutes or something.
Hmm.
You know,
right?
to go on for almost what, like 7 minutes? I mean, that
Seven
was,
plus, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
7+ minutes. I mean, wow, that was nervy to do, to say the least.
Hmm.
But that's interesting. I didn't really think of that. That, yeah, Hey Jude was, and you, as you said, it was is repetitive in some ways, and I Want You does sort of mimic that, and yeah, did not obviously resonate with people like Hey Jude did.
Mm.
So, oh, that may be in volume 2. Thanks, Alan.
Okay. And another thing in the Rain chapter, you talk about the conflict between George Martin's version and John Lennon's version of who invented the backwards ending there.
Yeah.
Um,
Mm.
do you have a particular feeling about where the truth lies?
Oh man, that is really hard to say, because I understand that John, what John said, and by the way, this is, I'm sure all of you will agree, it presents a lot of research problems when
Hmm.
you look at John's interviews that he's
Right.
done.
Yes,
Let's
indeed.
just say they're not the most consistent that I've seen, and
Yeah.
it kind of And it kind of depended on what mood he was in that day,
Hmm.
and so it's really hard to say. I believe John 110%, and it's not because he's. I mean, I'm not saying he was lying or anything,
Mm.
but it's just he would change his mind. I mean, you see it from interview to interview. So George Martin, I mean, there are times when and I have great respect for George Martin. I mean, absolute respect. But you know, memories over time definitely can change, and I don't know. It's so frustrating when you read, or like if you read Jeff Emmerich's book, which is great, but there's a bit of a preference for Paul in that, and so you have
Hmm.
to read it with that in mind.
Hmm.
Hmm.
So it's so hard to determine. So I guess maybe I would slightly favor George Martin, but boy, it's close.
I once asked George Martin about that conflict, actually.
Mm,
Um, and it was when one of his books came out, the last one, the one that was in Genesis. I know you've quoted from it in your book.
yeah,
Can't recall a playback.
playback, yeah.
Um, and I said, you've told this story, but John has a different story where he says he went home and he took the tape and put it on the machine backwards by accident, and he came up with that. And he was actually very caustic, which is unusual for him. He said,
Wow.
"Yes, well, John invented everything, didn't he? But let me
Ooh.
tell you, he was the least technical of all of them."
Well, and
So,
that is true. I've read that he was, yeah, technically he was really at a loss. That's
but
true.
it
It's
still doesn't totally contradict it in a way because okay, he's the least technical of all of them. His story is that he accidentally put the tape on,
really,
threaded
which
backwards, so
yeah, which
that
that
works.
does kind of follow. Yeah,
So
exactly.
so
That
it
does
didn't
kind of
really
follow.
solve the mystery, but at least we had a further comment on it.
Uh,
Okay, so back to Al, I guess.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, now this is in essence, an anthology of Kit's work
mhm.
over the years. In something else, in Blinded by Music,
Yeah.
and Beatle fan as well. But there is one what you might call Easter egg or bonus track
Mhm.
in this collection. And Kit, why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, this is a chapter you can't find anywhere else but the book. It is 10 of I think some of Ringo's underrated drumming performances, and I came up with this because of course being inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame this year finally. It's funny, I would hear from people, I talk to people about it, and I'd say, well, isn't it great that he's finally in? And it was just the same old garbage. People saying, well, he was just lucky. He was just the luckiest guy, because let's face it, he was an average drummer, and I mean, it's just gotten so tired, and I decided, all right, I need to challenge myself here, because as I read through it, I thought, wow, I haven't written as much about Ringo. So I went through and listened to songs that I thought, I mean, I stayed away from the obvious stuff as much as good, like Rain. I mean, wonderful performance, but Ringo has talked about that numerous times.
Hmm.
So I thought, okay, we'll set that aside. The drum solo in the end, wonderful, but again, too obvious. So I thought, let's look at some that are a little less, a little more subtle, a little less obvious, and say how even some of his subtle kind of drumming really could make a song, make or break a song. And it was really fun to write, because it was great to revisit and look at, the kind of techniques he used. And as I said earlier, he had that imagination and versatility. He was up for anything, and I think that's what made him such a great drummer for the Beatles and in general, but particularly for the Beatles, that, he was up to doing, something like Strawberry Fields, where, I mean, that was a very challenging song to do. And I think he was, as I said, just sort of up for, all right, let's try this. Let me drape these tea towels over the drum and see how that changes the sound, all that kind of stuff. I don't know how many other drummers would be capable of that, and so that's what I try to do, as James Brown would say, to give the drummer some, and to just focus on what, he's not a technical drummer, as he's always that's always brought up, but that he was the right fit for this group, and he was so versatile in how he could change to, adapt his style to fit the mood of a song, not just the tempo, but the mood. And so that's the extra, the bonus track, as I call it in the book.
Now, in the same vein, you've done over the last year at various conventions and also on Jude Kessler's John Lennon Hour, a piece you call the 10 Sounds That Changed the World.
Mm-hmm.
Now, have you tried at all to do a written version? Obviously, it's tough to describe 10 sounds that change the world without having the sounds there themselves. But have you tried to do any kind, sort of a written version of that piece?
I would actually love to do that, and I've been trying to figure out a way to do it, because, as you said, it's hard to write about it, because obviously playing the sounds, and this is a presentation that I first did at the Beatles at the Ridge Festival, which is in Walnut Ridge, Arkansas, and I did the first top 10 sounds that Beatles sounds that changed the world, and I isolated different, a guitar riff, or one of Ringo's drum solos, or a vocal. I would just pull out these different things, and it got such a great response that I decided, I then started doing it. I did in L.A. I did this past fest in Chicago. I hope to do it in New York, and this year at Beatles at the Ridge, I did a sequel. And so I came up with 10 more, and it's really gotten great response, and all I can say is thank God for those Rock Band mixes.
Yes.
Thank God.
I got to say, I saw that in L.A. and I was floored. It was absolutely fantastic.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, I told you that in L.A. I mean, it was really really interesting to go through those things, and all the the fascinating stuff that you pulled out in that discussion was just wonderful. It really was. So.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Well, it's fun to do, and the audience seems to get into it. And my whole thing, and by the way, this goes for my book too, is I love to just, when I'm writing about these songs, I put on my headphones, and I listen very closely to these songs. And in fact, a couple of people have told me who've read my book, they've said, I don't tell them to do this. They say, when I read your book, I put on a pair of headphones, or I at least turn on the music and read as I'm listening to the songs. And I thought, that's exactly what I want you to do. That's exactly. And, the sounds is, an extension of that. I mean, it was, it's just great to see when I've isolated the strings from Yesterday. And I'll say to people, now, you've heard Yesterday 1,000 times, we all have, but I want you to listen to it with a fresh pair of ears. Listen to just the string arrangement. And it lends a whole different aspect to the song, and I talk about, and Allan, I know you can say a lot more about this than I can, but, the way that classical music was introduced, and melded with pop and rock music, and just that song was phenomenal, And it's just great when you see the audience really listen to this, and, really listen to a track like Yesterday with from a new perspective, and it's just a lot of fun to do. So I'd love to develop this somehow into an article or a book, and just have to figure out how to replicate this just through writing. But I'd love to do it.
And just to expand on that point about listening, you devote an entire section of the book to the 2009 Beatles remasters, and in effect do a kind of a listener's guide to those. Tell us about that, or how what you brought, what actually those, that's part of a series that you did for Blog Critics.
Yep, Blog Critics, and I'm so glad, Al, that you pulled that out, because I was talking about this with Steve the other day. This is like a point of pride with me. I have to admit, I was very proud of this. That was a feature I worked very, very hard on, and because I wanted to present as full a picture as I could of what the remastering process is, and what are the differences. And and a number of people were asking me at the time, and I'm sure it was the same with all of you too. You were asking, why should I buy these again?
Right.
And that comes up all the time. You think, how many times can I, buy Rubber Soul? I mean, so I was trying to go through that and to show how different these mixes were than the 87 remasters, which I like to say sounded like they were recorded in a tin can. I mean, they were terrible, and so I like to, I really wanted to show the differences. Now I also, wanted to make the point. I'm not saying that remastering is always the be all and end all. I was talking with Steve about this the other day about remixes, that the dangerous thing with remixes can be the temptation to correct can be a little hard. I mean, I'm okay with correcting, obviously, like tape hiss or something like that. But when you're getting into correcting perhaps an errant note, or a background noise, a chair squeak or something like that, that's when it's getting dangerous, as I feel like you're tampering with history. And so I'm okay with enhancing the sound in some ways, but it can be dangerous. And it was interesting when I was going through the research, and I was getting opinions from people, different people I knew, including Al, I believe you're quoted in there, that, and Steve, I think you're quoted. And so I wanted to get an opinion of, is remastering, is it the be all and end all? Is this really? And I got kind of a diversity of opinions. It was very interesting, because I didn't want to do a piece that just said, this is it, this is it's perfect, and just go ahead and rebuy your whole just throw out the old albums and buy these, and you're done. I wanted to do a more nuanced look at the remaster.
Right.
So I was I worked very hard on that, and even though, of course, now it's on iTunes and things have changed, I thought a lot of the topics that I brought up in that piece are still relevant, and so I wanted to include it.
So how did you feel about, say, the Yellow Submarine song track when the mixes were changed there?
Yeah.
Some people love those mixes.
Yeah, and and I mean, as I said, I'm so torn about this. I really am, because I as I said, in some ways, remixes can bring out some different nuances. In fact, today I just got, and I'll be reviewing soon, the remixes of Tug of War and Pipes of Peace. And I'm very excited to listen to those. And I was listening to the remix of Tug of War, and it's fascinating. I mean, it brings out some instrumentation and all that I never noticed before. And but they're not, at least they're not inserting it, or, I mean, it's not artificial. They just up the volume, and I mean, I'm not a technical person when it comes to this, but they just enhance. They didn't try to change it, and that's where I'm off, I'm off the grid or whatever when it comes to, tampering too much with history. But I know that the song track was popular. I just have, I have very mixed feelings about it.
Are you nervous? Are you nervous about the DVD?
Well, I mean, the films, I'm not nervous at all. I mean, I saw online they had Strawberry Fields, the film, and it
Mm-hmm.
was, I mean, stunning. Looks like it could have been filmed yesterday. I mean, it was just
Mm-hmm.
incredible.
Mm.
So that's fantastic. But yeah, when I heard that they're remastering yet again the tracks for one, I thought, oh, what more can they do? I mean, what is there to do? And so I'm, I mean, I'll still get it. I mean, I want to hear it, and particularly for the DVD. But
Mhm.
I'm very curious to hear what precisely, what more they can do with
Mm-hmm.
remixing. I mean,
Well,
I honestly don't know.
you've heard a little bit of
Right.
it actually already. I mean,
Yeah,
if you all through the anthology, all those things are remixed for 5.1.
Mm.
true.
Right.
So if you like the sound of the anthology, it may be more like that. Although they're not using those remixes, they're going to be new. I think Giles Martin ones. My impression is that Giles Martin has a good, healthy respect for the stuff.
Yeah.
And I think it probably will just be a question of placements and clarity, and the fact that by going back to the master tapes or going up a couple of generations, more than they were able to by just remastering the stereo mixes in 2009. So that may yield some greater clarity too.
Yeah, and having Giles involved, I mean, definitely makes me more comfortable
Yeah.
with it. I mean, because as you said, I agree. I think he does have a healthy respect. I mean, more than probably many other people about keeping the integrity of the original recordings.
You could also say he's going to be fairly conservative and
Mhm.
traditional, which will make a lot of people happy. But there are also people out there that want them to take chances, and and that's probably not going to happen.
Well,
Well,
and I'm
that's what sort of love was for,
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
Hmm.
I was just thinking that exactly
Hmm.
because I mean, love. I mean, because I put that in a whole different category, as you said. I mean, that was wonderfully done. I mean, I thought for what it is, for that project, for the it was stunning. Absolutely stunning.
Well, I think there's two things about love. It's the way it's the sound, and it's also what they did with the tracks. And I
Mhm.
thought what they did with the tracks, because you hear all sorts of amateur mashups on
Yeah,
YouTube,
Sure.
and a lot
sure.
of them
Mhm.
suck. A lot of them suck very
Yeah.
bad.
but a lot of them are
Well,
Where
pretty great
I,
too.
don't- I have not heard many good ones, Alan,
Hmm.
outside of Love. I really haven't.
Hmm.
I thought what they did with Love was really good. I mean, steer me toward a couple of good ones, because I haven't heard many. Most of the ones I've heard sound pretty bad. They sound really, really artificial. That was
Uh-huh.
the other thing that I thought they got. Of course, George was involved with that one too, but they had it sounded very natural. And a lot of
Well, I
the
mean, they had better materials to work with than the people
Right.
doing the amateur ones, of
oh,
Sure.
course, and because
that's
the
true.
amateur ones were mostly also before Rock Band, which
Yes, that's true.
um, would allow a lot of other stuff. Um,
Hmm.
but
But
yeah,
the talent in doing mashups isn't just the mixing, it's having the mind to know
yeah,
what songs work well together.
Mhm.
yeah.
I mean, one of the most brilliant things on there is combining Within You Without You with the backing of Tomorrow Never Knows.
Yeah.
Right.
To
That's one.
think of
Oh,
that, that was brilliant.
and that had a great effect too because after I remember seeing Love and hearing that, and that made me go back to the original recording, of the original version of Within You Without You, and that remix gave me a whole new appreciation of that song. I mean, it
Yes.
it
Hmm.
brought out George's vocals, which I think, now, in fact, in the last top 10 sounds presentation I did, I included, I found his vocals isolated, which are
Hmm.
just incredible, and the way he used his voice as an instrument, in that, to imitate the sitar and other instruments in that, which is very hard to do. Um,
Hmm.
and he just did a remarkable job. And yeah, that Love remix really made me go back and listen to the original recording. So if nothing else, I mean, if the Love mixes will have people go back and listen to the original recordings in new ways, that's great. Those kind of remixes I think are terrific.
Hmm.
I also
Yeah.
like the background instrumentation on "Within You, Without You" with the
Yes,
that is really
that's
fun.
beautiful.
It is.
It really is.
Hmm.
And it was funny. As I said, I did the presentation recently, the sequel of the sounds, and when I played his vocals, I said to the audience, "Now I know what you're thinking. This is the track I always skip when I listen to
Mm.
Sergeant Pepper," and half the audience nodded their heads. It was
Hmm.
really funny, and I said, if nothing else, if you get nothing else from this presentation today, go home, get out your copy of Sergeant Pepper, and give this another listen. It's there's more going on there than I think you may initially have thought. And so,
Hmm.
but it's funny, yeah, because as I said, when I said, I bet most of you skipped that track, and everybody nodded.
And
Absolutely.
now,
Hmm.
now for me, it's the one song amongst many that I appreciate so much more now than I ever have.
Yes,
I agree.
very much
I
so.
think it's such a masterpiece on every level
Yeah,
and way ahead of its time.
Well,
yeah.
and I think that's the key. It was ahead of its time, and
Hmm.
I think that you were saying earlier about Paul taking chances with press to play and everything. That yeah, some fans don't like it when bands deviate, from their known sound and go in a completely different direction. And it sometimes does. It takes years to finally say, oh, I get what they were doing. You know.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Hmm.
very much so. And incidentally, since Kit mentioned the Tug of War and Pipes of Peace archive collections, in the spirit of self-promotion, should mention that we will be covering those archive reissues in the next probably within the next couple of weeks, hopefully with our friend Tom Frangione to give us an expert analysis of, well, one of which is his favorite solo Beatles album. This has been a fascinating hour, and once again has been all too fast. But before we leave, we do need to bring Steve in for a couple of things. One of which is the fact that he over the weekend saw Ringo Starr and the All Star Band in concert, and he can
Hmm.
give us a report on that.
Well, he played at Masonic Auditorium in San Francisco on the 1st of October, and which is located right across the street from Grace Cathedral. And God, that was gorgeous at night because I had never seen that. But anyway, the Masonic was actually a fairly intimate place. It was like an auditorium, and even standing in the back where we had to stand to shoot the pictures that we took for the article, everybody had a really good seat. I didn't go upstairs, so I don't know about upstairs, but downstairs the views were great. And he did his usual same length show. The big thing was that he did Island in the Sun from Postcards from Paradise, and he also brought back Your 16, which was really a pleasant surprise because that was one that I'd kind of wanted him to do again, and he did. So that was also very nice. But it was the usual show. They started out praising each other, how much they loved being in the band and how there was a lot of that going around, which actually at this point is getting a little tedious for me because you really want to hear these guys play, and I don't know, guys, I'm getting to the point where I want to see a change in the band. I don't know about you, but I do. I mean, these guys are good, but I would like to see a couple of new people come in. But we'll see what he does. But anyway, it was fun. It was a good show. The other thing I was going to mention was that today another auction was announced, and this one's going to auction off the drumhead that he used on the Ed Sullivan Show. And all these things, all these historical, well, the '63 drum kit, and now this getting auctioned. Boy, somebody ought to be holding on to this stuff. It really kind of is a little irritating that these things are going to go by the wayside. And although you don't know who's going to buy them, but still, it'd be nice to have these things exhibited somewhere, and I guess that's not going to happen. But what can I say? Anyway, but Ringo was fun, and if he's out in your area, by all means, go see him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There's a couple of things that were surprises there in the concert because he said many years ago he wasn't going to do You're 16 anymore
Mm-hmm.
because he felt uncomfortable in his age talking about a 16-year-old girl.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like Mick Jagger. Does he stop singing Satisfaction? It doesn't matter. It's a great song. A great song is a great song.
He made one other comment kind of like that during the show, and I unfortunately I didn't write it down. I can't remember what it. He said something about, well, you Americans, you have this attitude, kind of that kind of thing. But I don't know. Maybe he was just feeling really, a little loose the first night. But yeah, I mean, but he did. I was glad to see him do it. It was good to hear that again. So, in fact, I looked it up. He hadn't sung that since 2003. And that
Wow.
was a kind of a surprise. I was kind of curious, and I went back on Setlist FM just to see how long it had been, and I couldn't believe it had been that long. So, hey.
And of his biggest hits, he hasn't done the No-No song for quite a while, too.
Right.
So, yeah, that's another one.
Plus, of course, the one that he still has never done, which was, one of his biggest hits, and that's only You.
Yeah, that's the only top 10 hit. The only top 10 hit he's had in the U.S. that he's never done live.
Mm-hmm.
When we had Tom Frangione on, we were talking about Postcards from Paradise and predicting what he would do in concert. We all thought definitely Rory and the Hurricanes.
Yeah.
Because, it's him showing pride in the band before the Beatles and, another autobiographical song, which he seems to like to do with Liverpool 8. The Other Side of Liverpool, and also the title track, Postcards from Paradise. You can only imagine all the photos that he could show, probably from his book,
Sure.
while that song is performed. And so instead they chose the only song that was written by everybody in the band. How did that sound, by the way, Steve?
It sounded like the album. I mean, it was the same, it wasn't anything astonishing. They sounded good. There was Masonic had good acoustics, so the place sounded pretty nice. I mean, I don't think they sounded better than they did in San Jose when I saw them last year, which was the ceiling was much higher. This place had a kind of a fairly low ceiling, so the sound wasn't didn't have so far to go. And so I really like the place. I hope he goes back there again. I hope he does that again. Yeah. So
was the set list any different for the other guys in the band?
What do you mean?
The other band members, did they do anything different from the previous tour of their material?
I think actually, I didn't go through and look. Let me look at the set list because I printed it all down the bottom here. Well, you'll be glad to know Rundgren did bang the drum. He didn't do what's that one song?
Love is the Answer?
No, he did
Love is the Answer?
He did do Love is the Answer.
Hello, It's Me?
Yes, that he did not do.
Oh,
That he did not do. And I was actually disappointed. He did I Saw the Light.
Right, that's what he did the last tour. He didn't do Hello, It's Me.
Yeah, but he's done Hello, It's Me before. So
right.
So he didn't do that. And Greg Raleigh did Oye Como Va, which I don't think he did last time either.
Yeah, he did. He actually did. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, they didn't do Everything Is Everything, which he did. I think the first tour. He did.
Okay.
He did Black Magic Woman and Oye Como Va. Greg Raleigh, and
all right.
So, but I think everybody else did just about everything the same.
Interesting.
There you go.
Very interesting.
Yep.
Well, this has been an absolutely fascinating hour. And Kit, I want to just thank you very, very much for joining us.
Well, thank you. I had a wonderful time. It was great talking with you all.
The book is called Songs We Were Singing, guided tours throughout the Beatles, lesser known tracks and more as well. And now, in terms of contacting you, you're all over the place. Kit still does the Hard Day's Net column in Beatle Fan, which she's been doing for just about 20 years, right?
Yeah, next year will be my 20th anniversary. Can't believe it.
Yeah, amazing. You can contact Kit through Beatle Fan, and also, I guess, through something else.
Yep, and I'm on Facebook and Twitter. Just look me up, and I post all kinds of, stuff, my latest articles and upcoming things I'm working on. So, yeah, you can follow me both places.
That's great. And Steve, our contact info is?
Things We Said Today radio show at gmail.com. We have a group page and a radio page on Facebook. And we're also on a what?
We have a YouTube.
Right.
We have a YouTube page. And we're not on Instagram yet. We're going to have to do that, guys. I don't know what we're going to do, but we got to join the crowd there. But we are also on Twitter. Things We Said Fab is our Twitter handle. So, there you go.
And Ken or Allan, anything to promote?
Well, you can go to my website, which is kenmichaelsradio.com, and every single week there's Beatles Trivia, where you can win one of 9 prizes. And it just so happens that this coming week, as soon as this gets posted, I have new prizes to give away, including Tug of War and Pipes of Peace, the remasters. And I also have the new Jeff Lynne DVD, Live at Hyde Park, to give away, and the new Hollywood Vampires CD to give away. So all this new stuff coming up, and there will be a special contest on my website where I'm giving away 3 CDs in one package, and that's starting this weekend as this show airs for the first time. It gets posted on the internet.
And Allan, anything?
Oh, not particularly. I mean, if you haven't yet bought a copy of Got That Something, How the Beatles Uphold Your Nation,
there you go.
You can get that, I think, on Amazon.com still as an ebook. And there is my 1995 Beatles book on Phaidon, published by Phaidon, called The Beatles from the Cavern to the Rooftop.
Which would be a wonderful companion to Kit's book.
Yes, it would.
It's true, and I just got a royalty check today, so it's obviously still selling.
Right. Exactly. Well, once again, Kit, thanks very much for joining us, and for Allan Kozinn and Steve Marinucci and Ken Michaels. This is Al Sussman, and we will see you next time.